Let me start by saying this could very well have been a fever dream. I've questioned my parents about it numerous times over the years, and I've never been able to pin things down to an exact time or place. However, what I remember seems so vivid that I almost can't believe it didn't happen. From what I recall, I was around 4 and my parents and I were taking a road trip vacation. We'd usually go on a longer trip every summer or during spring break, mostly to theme parks and national monuments. I have no idea where we were going on this particular trip, but I vaguely recall this was near the beginning, maybe the first or second day driving. For backstory, my mom has an autoimmune condition. She stays on top of it, and as far as I know she's fine, but on occasion she has flares that require more medication. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but either she forgot some of her meds at home, or started having a flare after we left, and her doctor had to call in a prescription to this pharmacy along the route we were taking. From the car seat in the back of my dad's red Honda Civic, I could see it was a beautiful clear day. We had the windows and sunroof down, and I was singing along to the kids' music CD my parents were playing. We were on this 2-lane highway cutting through the desert, and there was nothing for miles. Eventually, a single large building came into view. As we got closer, I saw it was a massive store, separated from the highway by an equally gigantic parking lot. The place looked new, like brand new, with the asphalt black and freshly painted. Try as I might, I cannot remember the name of this place. My dad slowed down and turned off the highway into the parking lot, then my mom looked at my dad. She asked him if he was sure this was the right address, as the place appeared to be completely deserted. I looked around and confirmed the parking lot was completely empty. My dad said, "Yeah, it's the only one on the map," as he pulled into one of the parking spaces right at the front. My mom and dad got out, and my dad unbuckled me from my car seat. As we walked to the main front entrance, I marveled at the incredibly tall wall of brick and cinder blocks. I also ran ahead to the 2 sets of sliding glass doors. Right as the second set opened and a gust of air hit me in the face, I stopped. The inside of the store was completely deserted as well. Now, I was pretty young and didn't always have the best sense of danger, but I still remember being confused and a little afraid when I stared down the 2 empty aisles in front of me. Probably the main reason this struck me as odd was because I'd never been in a completely empty store before. Even when my mom would take me shopping with her late at night, there'd always be a decent number of people in our neighborhood H-E-B. I remember looking back at my mom, and she had stopped dead in her tracks. She turned to my dad and said something I couldn't hear. My dad, who was always a little more adventurous, tried to assure her things were fine. He smiled and joked that we could run around and explore the aisles. My mom quickly blurted out that we should find the pharmacy first, and that we needed to stick together. After a second or two of looking up and scanning the signs, my parents found the one pointing to the pharmacy. It was immediately to our left, so we walked over there through the aisles with vitamins and bath products. From what I remember, this was a rather large in-store pharmacy with 3 or 4 pickup registers and 1 drop-off location to the side. There weren't any coverings drawn down over the glass, and the lights were on, but just like the rest of the store, there didn't appear to be anyone there. Here's where my mom started to freak out a bit and insisted that we go back to the car. My dad gestured for us to wait a moment as he looked around, then pointed to a sign by the window with the pharmacy's phone number and address. My mom confirmed this was the right location. We all looked around again, still trying to figure out why the entire store would be deserted in the middle of the day. My mom repeated her request that we just leave the store, but I said I had to use the bathroom and my dad agreed it would be best to do so before getting back in the car. He said he'd stand guard outside the women's restroom while we were inside, though we instead opted for one of the family restrooms. After opening the door and confirming no one was inside, my dad went back out and stood facing into the store. For some reason, the image of him just standing there as my mom closed the door behind him is still stuck in my mind. A few minutes later we were done and my mom opened the door. I remember her being visibly uneasy, and she only opened it a few inches before making sure my dad was there. He was, so she opened it all the way. But here's where things, or at least my memories, took a bizarre and horrifying turn. As I finished washing my hands and was watching my parents through the door, my mom walked up to my dad and whispered something in his ear. Then they both turned to the right, towards the store entrance, and seemed surprised by something. My mom suddenly walked back to the door and closed it with me still inside. I just stood there, now heart racing, but before I could scream or say anything, the memory just ends. Like I said, I've asked my parents about what happened countless times, and we still can't definitively determine when or where this took place. We've narrowed it to like 4 or 5 different vacations, and while my mom did say she had prescriptions called in to out-of-town pharmacies, she has no recollection of us visiting a deserted one. Her closing the door and leaving me in the bathroom in such a scenario would also be extremely out of character, as both of my parents are loving and wonderful people. Therefore, rationally, I have to believe this experience never took place. But still, it seems so real. I even remember freaking out at how real it seemed as a kid and asking my parents about it then. I also have no idea why my brain would have made up a story like that. My best guess is that it came up with it when I had a fever, but I don't remember any other fever dreams even remotely as coherent or disturbing as this one. I know that part of me will always question this experience, and while I don't happen to believe in the paranormal, I can't help but wonder if some kind of entity or force influenced these events. I used to drive cross-country to visit my parents and other family during the holidays. This was in my early 20s after I'd graduated from college and moved several states away to start my job, and before I began dating my wife and settled down to start my family. My parents, especially my mom, would always tell me to fly, but there was just something about taking a break and driving on the open road that I always loved. Plus, I wouldn't have to deal with the hassle of buying tickets and going through airports, and I'd be able to drive my car when I was back in town. Anyway, on one of these trips, I found myself alone on the highway as the sun was going down. I think this was a week before Christmas in 2015. I'd already eaten dinner and had a bit of caffeine to keep me going as I planned to continue driving for several hours, but as a consequence I had to use the bathroom. While I didn't have a problem pulling off on the side of the road, I'd usually try to find a bathroom or at least a side street first. After a few minutes of being on the lookout, another exit came into view and I took it. At first I thought this was just some deserted road, but a moment later I noticed a big concrete structure nearby. I turned and drove towards it and realized it was a shopping center that was still under construction. The parking lot directly connected to the road and the other three sides had a row of concrete buildings around them. Some of the buildings weren't finished yet, like they didn't have windows or roofs, but others did. I parked near the corner of the lot and got out of my car, taking in the cool evening air. I also took a moment to listen and be aware of my surroundings, but I didn't hear anything besides the sounds of nature. Walking behind one of the buildings, I did my business, then came back to the front. As I'd been driving all day, it felt good to stretch my legs, so I decided to walk around the shopping center for a few minutes. I began walking towards the other side of the row of buildings, on the long side of the parking lot which was parallel to the road. Most of the units in this row seemed finished and had those for lease posters in the window. One of the stores did already have merchandise inside. It looked like a gaming or electronics store and had this big poster of a wind-up toy knight. Eventually I reached the corner and turned left, down the row of buildings leading up to the road. These ones weren't finished, and while I contemplated walking around inside the buildings, I decided it'd be better not to. Finally I reached the main road and couldn't walk any further, so I began walking diagonally back through the lot to my car. But that's when I heard the sound. Instinctively I looked up to where I thought the sound had come from, but I didn't see anything. I was just about to turn around and start walking again when I heard it again. It sounded like a moan or grunt, and after hearing it a second time, I was pretty sure it was a person. My blood ran cold, and a moment later I saw someone peeking over the edge from the top of one of the buildings. I jumped back, and the person walked closer to the edge to where I could see their whole body. He was a man, maybe in his 30s, with disheveled brown hair and wearing a plaid shirt and baggy blue jeans. He had a blank, unsettling facial expression, and I noticed him making these repetitive movements with his head and shoulder. I immediately knew he wasn't well, and I started to back up, all while maintaining eye contact. But then, in a moment of sheer terror, the man drew out a large knife and held it up in the air. I managed not to scream, but took off running. I made it back to my car in under 30 seconds, but after starting it, I made a terrifying discovery. The low-pressure light was on. I looked back in the direction of that man, but the sun was setting and he was too far away to see. After doing a 360, I got out of my car and inspected my tires. Luckily, it was only the front right tire, and I did have a spare. I couldn't tell if the man had slashed it, but in any case, it was completely flat. Now I had a decision to make. Heart pounding, I opened my trunk and got the spare, jack, and tire iron. Nothing can convey the paranoia I felt frantically changing the tire in the fading light, as I knew that any moment a deranged lunatic could run around a building with a knife. While I did have the tire iron to use as a weapon, I prayed to God I wouldn't actually have to confront that man. 5 minutes later I was done, and I jumped back into my car. I sped out of the parking lot and back onto the highway, and drove to the next town, which was like 30 minutes away. Luckily there was a hotel as well as a mechanic, and they were able to patch up my tire early the next morning. Apparently what caused the flat was just a small nail, possibly due to the construction, and the tire hadn't been slashed. I got back on the road and arrived at my parents' in the evening without further incident. Now, maybe this seems strange, but I didn't actually mention to them or anyone else what had happened. After making it to the hotel that night, I figured I wasn't followed, and letting my mom know about what happened would result in her flipping out and worrying for no reason. I guess I could have called the cops to report the man, but I imagined he'd be long gone by the time they got there. I still think about what happened from time to time, including the image of that man standing on top of the building with a knife silhouetted by the sunset. I imagine he was completely insane, but I'm also curious about how he got there, and if he had just been waiting for someone to show up. I've driven this particular route a few more times over the years, but never decided to stop there again. Ultimately, I'm glad I was able to make it away unharmed, but it just goes to show you never know who might be waiting for you in the middle of nowhere. There was this abandoned building on the outskirts of town where I grew up. Or maybe I shouldn't even call it that, since it was never actually finished. The place was basically just a few concrete walls and a concrete floor, with only part of the floor on the second level finished. I'm not sure what this place was supposed to be, but my guess would be either a warehouse or a fitness center. It was tucked away in this wooded area, and there weren't any signs either on the building itself or the random back roads you'd have to take to get there. The only reason I knew about it is because one time in high school my girlfriend Katie and I got in my car and drove around, just to explore, and randomly arrived at it. Now, being in an isolated location, we knew we had to be cautious. There wasn't any graffiti, which was a good sign not many people knew about it, but who knows if anyone else came there. Oddly enough, it became our little sanctuary, partly because Katie's dad had a type of blood disease, and that put her and her mom under considerable stress. We'd usually pack some snacks and drive out there every few weeks or so and just walk around. While there wasn't that much to see inside, there did appear to be trails in the surrounding hills, which were really quite scenic. I don't think they were official trails, probably more like deer trails, but they were easy enough to hike. When this happened, Katie and I were both in our junior year and we'd been to this place about 5 times before. It was late November and started to get chilly in the evenings, though we never stayed past dark. Like I'd done before, I picked Katie up in the afternoon after her dance practice and we drove out there. Listening to the radio and hearing Katie sing along to it was so nice, since that meant she'd begun to relax. After following the back roads, we arrived half an hour later and I parked in the lot. There weren't actually lines on it, so we just parked at the very front. We'd always start by walking through the building, partly as a way to check and make sure no one else had been there. There wasn't a door, so we just walked through the open rectangle in the concrete. We walked around for a few minutes, and as nothing seemed out of place, we went back outside and began making our way to the trails. Now here is where I first picked up on something that was different. I couldn't place my finger on it, but I was like 60% sure something had changed. Katie turned to me and asked if something was bothering me, to which I ultimately replied no. Soon enough, we'd reached the other side of the parking lot and started hiking one of the trails that ran around the hillside. I guess it was about 2 miles and ran almost the whole way around the hill that the building was on. Katie and I began eating some of the bars we'd brought and talked most of the way. We reached the end about an hour later, at which point it was like 3. We decided to backtrack a bit and explore one of the other trails that apparently went further down the hill. But taking another look at the parking lot, I again got the sense that something wasn't right. Then it hit me, there was an old tire on the lot that hadn't been there before. I mentioned this to Katie, and I could immediately see she was uneasy. Maybe you think it's silly to feel that way over a tire, but like I said, this place was like our sanctuary, and up until this point we'd seen zero evidence of anyone else having been there. I asked if she wanted to go back, and after a moment of thought she said no. I was on the fence, but since an old tire seemed pretty innocent, we decided to stay. We did look at the tire and walk around inside the building again, and after nothing else seemed different, we began backtracking on the trail. It was about 500 feet to the junction, and when we began walking down the hill, the path got pretty steep pretty quickly. At one point there was like a 3-foot vertical drop, and considering how much work it would be to climb back up, we decided to turn back. Making our way to the parking lot was uneventful, but when we got there, Katie and I saw a circle of 5 or 6 people dressed in all black. My heart sank in my stomach, and in that moment I felt responsible and so sorry I had brought Katie here. I motioned for her to go back, and we took a few steps until we were out of sight of those men. Like any good horror movie, we had no cell reception. I kicked myself for not thinking to check that earlier. Now my mind was racing, and though I briefly considered running for my car, I knew I'd never make it in time. Instead, Katie and I decided to keep hiking back around the trail, since being near the top of the hill would provide the best chance of getting service. Every minute we spent on that trail was sheer terror, and I knew I'd hear voices or the sound of footsteps coming towards us any minute. I can't tell you how good it felt to see that one bar pop up on my phone. Katie and I took a few more steps to make sure the signal was stable, then dialed 911. As we waited on the line with the operator, the sun went down on the hill, and I couldn't help but think of how much trouble I was in. Katie kept trying to tell me it wasn't my fault, but I still felt horrible. Eventually, like 30 minutes later, we heard footsteps and the police announced their presence, and we walked back into the trail from where we'd been waiting. They asked us a few questions, then escorted us back to my car where they had Katie and I contact our parents. Katie had never gotten any service on her phone, and we had both been trying to stay quiet for fear of one of those men overhearing us. Thankfully, out of each of our parents, only my mom seemed really upset, and I think that was more about the situation. Katie's dad even said we handled the situation the best way and congratulated us for not panicking. Katie and I were both forbidden from going back there, but of course we had no desire to. And in case you were wondering, no, the police never identified who those men were. They were apparently long gone by the time the police arrived, and while I'm not sure if they launched any kind of investigation, I never heard anything about it again. My main theory is that they were from some kind of cult, and they just chose that location because of how secluded it was. I have no way of knowing if they meant us harm, and maybe they would have just let me and Katie walk back to my car, but there was no way I was going to take that chance. In the end, I'm just glad we both got away safe.